Right now, today, two of the largest militaries on Earth are pointed at the same set of targets from opposite sides of the world. Russian forces hold a line across Eastern Europe that has not moved meaningfully in months. Chinese naval exercises tighten around the Taiwan Strait like a hand slowly closing. NATO's eastern flank stretches thin from the Baltic coast all the way down to the Black Sea. And somewhere in a room that does not appear on any public map, planners on both sides have run the same calculation. What happens if both flashpoints stop being flashpoints at the same time? That is the question. Can Russia and China actually win a simultaneous war against the West? Or does the math fall apart the moment the shooting starts? We are not predicting the future here. We are stress testing the present, using real deployments, real doctrines, and real capability gaps to see where the whole structure actually holds and where it does not. Start with what Russia and China actually bring to this fight, because dismissing either side is how you end up with a bad analysis. Russia holds the second largest nuclear arsenal on the planet, somewhere around 6,000 warheads total, enough destructive yield to erase every major city in the Northern Hemisphere, and then do it again. Its S-400 and S-500 air defense networks are among the most capable surface-to-air systems ever built. Russian forces have spent 3 years learning, the hard way, how a modern attritional war is actually fought, what breaks, what holds, and how to absorb punishment that would have ended a lesser army. And Russia carries one weapon no military hardware can match: the credible threat of escalation to a level that no democratic government wants to explain to its voters. That threat is Russia's real armor. China's weight is different. The People's Liberation Army is the largest military force by personnel on Earth, roughly 2 million active duty soldiers. The Chinese Navy now fields more hulls than the United States Navy, a number that sounds decisive until you look at what those hulls are carrying and where they can project power. The DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile, built specifically to kill aircraft carriers at ranges up to 900 miles, represents a genuine architectural shift in how naval warfare in the Pacific has to be calculated. Add the DF-26 intermediate range missile that can reach Guam, and China has constructed a barrier of fire across the first island chain that has no historical precedent. Home field advantage in the Taiwan Strait is not a minor detail. It is the entire premise of Chinese deterrent strategy. So what does the West actually have? The combined GDP of NATO, plus the major Pacific allies, the United States, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, runs somewhere above $40 trillion, more than 1.5 times the combined output of Russia and China together. That gap is not just an economics number. It is manufacturing capacity, logistics depth, and the ability to sustain a long war in ways that neither Moscow nor Beijing has ever had to test. The United States defense budget alone, around $880 billion annually, exceeds the next 10 national defense budgets combined, including both sides of this conflict. One Dutch company in the city of Eindhoven makes the only machine in the world capable of producing the most advanced semiconductors. That company is called ASML. It is on the western side. Every Chinese military system that depends on cutting-edge chips has a supply chain that runs through a choke point the West controls. That is not a tariff. That is a weapons platform. Now, the scenario breaks open. A Russian armored column crosses into a Baltic NATO member under a peacekeeping pretext. Article 5 is invoked within 24 hours. Simultaneously, Chinese amphibious forces begin movement toward Taiwan's outer islands. The coordination is not accidental. The logic is explicit. Split Western attention before either front can be fully resourced. Force a choice. The first thing that happens is not a battle. It is a city going dark. In Tallinn, the power grid drops within the opening hour. Russian cyber units, the same ones that have been probing Baltic infrastructure for a decade, execute what they have been rehearsing. Hospitals switch to backup generators. Traffic signals go black. The specific sound of a city losing electricity at night, a descending hum as systems power down in sequence, is something the residents of that city will not forget. Russian doctrine has always treated the electromagnetic and informational environment as the first battlefield. They are not wrong about its effect. NATO's very high readiness. Joint Task Force moves into the gap. American F-35s begin systematic suppression of Russian air defense corridors, using the same electronic warfare playbook that has been refined through decades of operations in contested airspace. The Russian general commanding the advance knows his S-400 performed well in exercises. He is about to learn that performing well in exercises against simulated fifth-generation stealth is a different problem than performing against the actual aircraft. His radar picture starts developing gaps. Not errors, gaps. Things that should be visible are simply not there, and then something explodes that he could not track. In the Pacific, 2 Virginia-class nuclear submarines, each one roughly as long as a city block and quieter than the ambient noise of the ocean around it, establish a barrier across the approaches to the Taiwan Strait. The Chinese surface fleet, which looks formidable in port and genuinely is formidable in port, discovers in open water that hull count does not protect against something you cannot locate. The DF-21D missiles launch against the American carrier strike groups. The carriers pull back beyond their maximum range. The missiles work, tactically. The submarines are still there. The logistics ships crossing the strait are not stealthy. They are large, slow, and identifiable from 40 meters underwater. On the financial side, swift exclusion of Russian and Chinese banking institutions takes effect by day 3. Dollar clearing stops. Chinese foreign exchange reserves, largely held in dollar-denominated assets, become contested terrain almost overnight. The ruble, which has lived through this before, enters freefall again. The yuan faces pressure it has never experienced in a genuine wartime stress test. The sound of this war, in Beijing's financial district, is not aircraft or artillery. It is the particular silence of trading floors when the numbers stop making sense. But here is where it gets complicated. The West wins every conventional engagement it chooses to fight. That sentence has a second half that changes everything. It does not choose to fight all of them. Russia's nuclear rhetoric, deployed strategically at every moment NATO considers accelerating its response, is not aimed at military commanders. It is aimed at the voters behind them. Every democratic government in this coalition has to keep explaining, week after week, why the price of energy, the disruption to supply chains, the flag-draped coffins coming home are worth continuing. Russia and China do not need to defeat the Western military. They need to outlast Western political will. Not the same problem, not the same solution. China has not fought a war since 1979. The People's Liberation Army has been modernized extensively on paper, equipped, reorganized, and expanded through 4 decades of sustained investment. What it has not done is fight a peer adversary in combined arms combat under live conditions. The gap between a military that is trained for war and one that has actually fought one is not a small gap. It is the difference between a flight simulator and a cockpit during an emergency, and nobody on Earth currently knows which side of that gap the PLA falls on when it matters. Meanwhile, India refuses to join either coalition. The Gulf states calculate their oil revenues against their security relationships and choose ambiguity. The Global South, which watched Western sanctions architecture be deployed as a political instrument throughout the 2010s, is not rushing to enforce them now. Russia and China both have sanction evasion corridors through non-aligned economies that meaningfully blunt the financial weapon. The West is winning militarily and bleeding politically. These are different ledgers, and they do not balance automatically. The resolution of the central question is this: Russia and China lose the conventional war. The combined weight of Western technology, logistics depth, financial leverage, and industrial capacity is too large and too distributed to be defeated in the field. That is not a close call. But winning the conventional war is not the same as winning the conflict. Russia's objective was never to defeat NATO. It was to survive as a regime and hold enough territory to claim victory to a domestic audience. China's objective was never to defeat the United States Navy. It was to take Taiwan before the cost became politically unacceptable in Washington. Both of those objectives remain partially in play long after the last missile battery goes quiet. The West can win the battle. Whether it wins the peace is a question that no weapon system answers. The soldiers who fought along NATO's eastern flank will come home and describe it the way soldiers always describe the war that ended without ending, as something that stopped rather than finished, as a line on a map that cost everything to hold and is still just a line on a map. Russian conscripts who survived will return to cities where state television has been explaining their victory for months, and the gap between what they saw and what the screen says will be a private wound they carry without language for it. Chinese sailors who lost ships to weapons they never detected will not have a framework for what happened to them. There is no legend in Chinese naval tradition for an enemy that kills from a position of perfect invisibility, that leaves no debris field you can point to, no pilot you can photograph, no flag you can burn. The loss will enter military memory as something closer to a natural disaster than a defeat. A thing that happened. A thing with no face. In the capitals that held, the story will eventually be told as a story about alliances, about the specific difficulty of 30 democracies agreeing to absorb economic pain for long enough to matter. Historians will argue about whether the West won or simply did not lose, and that argument will go on longer than the war did. The last image is not a carrier or a missile or a signing ceremony in a formal room. It is a polling station, somewhere in a tired democracy. Ordinary fluorescent light, an ordinary door, a line of people who have been paying a price they did not choose for a cause they were asked to believe in. They go inside. They make a decision. That decision, more than any weapons platform or defense budget or alliance treaty, is what the whole thing was always actually about. It still is.